I had a conversation about this just this morning with somebody on my team where I was just like, without sharing the details, it was that same conversation of, well, that I don't own that though. So how can I be helping them with this? I don't own that. We have ownership of things, but then there are these fuzzy lines of like, but we need you to cross over and show us this part.
Hello and welcome to the Making Better podcast, where we talk about how to make organizations, teams, and even individuals better. If you are a business owner, a learning and development professional, a manager, or even an individual contributor in your organization, this show will give you actionable insights to help improve your own performance and the performance of those around you. Our guest today is Christy Oliva. Christy, like many in the L&D field, started as a teacher in formal education. She made the move over to corporate learning and development and is now a program manager at Amazon. Since many people in the talent development space come from education, I wanted to sit down and chat with her about how she made that transition and what has been so successful. If you are new to the show, please make sure to hit subscribe so you never miss a future episode. If you are already subscribed, then I want to ask you to share this show with at least one other person, because that, after all, is how we grow. I can't tell you how much it means to me. With that, let's get started. Christy, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. I am super excited to have you on the show because, I think a lot of people like I said, a lot of people have made that transition from formal education into learning and development. You did it a little early, as we'll describe in a little bit. But what's really great about your story, I think, is that it's not just that you've made that first step. You've made several steps along that journey, from being, first you were where many people start, of being kind of that outside consultant, and then moved into a company as an instructional designer, and then moved farther along and now acting as a manager. So I am really excited to have you here today. The first question I have for you is, how lucky did you feel about the timing of you deciding to leave the formal education world into instructional design? Because you can share that the timing was pretty amazing.
Yeah, so I transitioned about 3.5 years ago, I think it was. And obviously at the time I didn't know that was probably a really great time to be doing it. I just was desperate to get out. But now looking back, yes, I think teachers in that 3 years, I tell my mentees all the time that I mentor teachers, and I tell them, I think it's exponentially gotten worse from when I left in the 3 years. So yeah, I feel really lucky that I discovered instructional design when I did, because it is getting to be a lot more frantic for teachers wanting to leave. And so, yeah, I'm definitely blessed in the fact that I discovered it when I did.
Yeah, I just had a recent discussion on another podcast about, I saw an article that said, so I live in LA, and in LA Unified, I think there's currently 450 open positions for teachers. California wide, there's something like 10,000. So it's definitely, it's gotten crazy. Like it was crazy before, as you said. It got crazier with the pandemic, and then for a variety of reasons, it continues to go on. I think it's really, and so I wasn't aware. I don't come from formal education. I come from, I was a trainer in a sense. So I was teaching stuff, but I was not aware of how many people there were transitioning over until relatively recently. When you made that transition, what did you find initially? Like, what made sense in your mind of what skills would move over, and what were kind of the most important skills that you saw translate?
Yeah, so when I first started searching, I really thought I had to stay in education. So I really started looking at, do I get my doctorate to become a professor? That was really what I thought. I'm going to have to either become a school administrator or a professor. But honestly, neither of those sounded good to me at all. I was not excited about either one of those. But I was like, I got to do what I got to do. There was nothing else I really wanted to do. I loved being a teacher, but it just got to be, the way I was being treated was not ideal. It wasn't what I wanted for myself or my family. And so, I really just started researching that. So I started researching what degrees I could get in school. And so what master's programs could I enter into? Because I didn't have a master's at the time. And obviously you have to have a master's to get a doctorate. And that was really the path I was going to start going on, was to become a professor. I was like,
And
okay,
that's a long path.
I know. And so I know, thank God I would still be on that path if that's what I went down. So, but then thankfully, as I started researching, and I honestly immediately started looking for new jobs too in the education sector. And I found a job for what was called an instructional technologist at a nearby university here in the Nashville area. And got the interview. I applied for the job, got the interview, and did one of those inbox interviews. I don't know if you've ever heard of those.
No.
Basically, they give you like this scenario of like you're kind of like in the day of the life of that job, and you have to accomplish as much as possible of these tasks. And then afterwards, you they ask you like, how did you decide what order you did them? It was a really fun exercise, honestly.
That's interesting.
I encourage people who are hiring to put people through it because it was super fun. Anyway, I didn't get that job, but it opened, because I didn't even really know what an instructional technologist was, honestly. Like I was like, oh, I got an interview. What am I supposed to do? But instructional technologist is one step away from instructional designer. You know, the technologist is more the behind the scenes person of like running the technology. But then I started finding in my searches popping up with instructional designer on LinkedIn or wherever I was searching, which brought me to Facebook groups that I joined about instructional design, which brought me to Idle Courses Academy, which ultimately led me on the path I'm on now. So
got it.
Yeah.
And that's great, because at least based on what my assumptions are, you know, of from my point of view of thinking about what I'm guessing an instructional technologist would be doing in a lot of organizations, I'm guessing the instructional designer was a straighter line from where you were, like to because it's still about that translation of knowledge versus the system stuff. Is that right?
For sure. Yeah. So the instructional technologist on my team at Amazon kind of does all the LMS work and can help me, like at me as a program manager for assessments. I'll be like, hey, what's possible? Can we do this type of assessment? And can we set it up this way for the learners? And he'll go and figure that out for me, and then we'll test it. So again, these roles can look so different from company to company with that title, like even instructional designer. But yes, the instructional design role was an immediate like puzzle piece fit from a teacher. And I think that's why so many teachers are transitioning to this, because it's a simple translation of terms. And I talk about this with my mentees as well. Like, you know, when we talk about our parents, the parents in schools, that's a stakeholder. When you talk about students, it's a learner. There's all these direct translations, and teachers already know how to implement learning theory. They already know how to design curriculum, design lessons, write learning objectives, write assessments, really the job that a learning instructional designer does. So those are those skills that just make that immediate transfer. And really all I had to learn was the technology. I had to learn Storyline, the Articulate Suite, Adobe Suite, how to translate those terms. But honestly, the biggest thing was confidence. And I'm finding that is the biggest thing that teachers are lacking, is confidence, not only to make the jump to leave the classroom, but to enter anything else. It gives me chills just now to even say it. Like they don't have the confidence. And I have some reasons behind that. I don't know if you want to get into that, but I go into it in my podcast. But I do believe that the education system today, as it stands, is a pretty abusive system towards teachers. And so that does get ingrained in the teachers, that they don't have any other skill set, which is not true.
Yeah, it's definitely not. I mean, it's one of the most, anybody who had a child during the pandemic and got to watch Zoom classes happening knows firsthand just how dynamic that situation is and just how many things teachers need to deal with. What steps did you take to kind of get over that? I mean, you mentioned Idle Courses. Was that kind of a big element in helping you get that confidence, or then, you know, how did you build your confidence over time?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So Idle was a big piece of that. The way that it's set up, I joined in its earliest days. Honestly, it's
Okay.
grown so much since then, and we have a lot
Yeah.
more one-on-one support with mentorship and stuff, which wasn't happening when I joined. But at the time, since it was so new, the owner, Dr. Robin Sargent, had a lot more bandwidth to provide one-on-one calls and things like that. So it's like when I expressed doubt, she would just get on a call with me and say, listen, I'm here for you. We got you. Now the mentors do that in the academy. And so that's what we provide. I'm a mentor in the academy. But Robin was a big part of that, just that support system of knowing, because it's mostly teachers, honestly. I mean, there are other people that come through Idle Courses Academy, don't get me wrong, people who are upskilling as instructional designers, or other fields. But there was a lot of other teachers around me, and teachers who had just transitioned. And so that really helped my confidence. But honestly, I'm just also the type of person that I don't mind taking risk. And so,
Nice.
for me, it was one of the riskiest times I could possibly even take a risk. But at the same time, it felt like if I didn't do it then, I was stuck. My husband had just left me and my new
Ooh.
daughter and my 2-year-old. So I had two young kids. I was teaching online. So I got the taste of the online teaching before the pandemic. I was teaching at an online school, and it was terrible. And I was not making much money. And so when my husband left, I got that wake up call of, am I going to have to be asking him for money every month? Or what do I need to do? I need to figure
Yeah.
something else out. And so
Yeah.
I guess it lit that, like, I don't know, that emergency fire that comes through any of us, that fight or flight. And I chose to fight, and fight for my family and fight for my own well-being so that I did not have to be asking the girl's dad for money every month. I wanted to be able to provide for myself.
I mean, I think you're right. And, something that I've observed in my own life is just, and this is true in any business too, just how strong of a push scarcity brings. Scarcity is where innovation lives. And whether it's, as unfortunate as I think that is sometimes, and whether that's forced upon you, through life circumstances or something that you can kind of create artificially, it definitely provides a strong push. I would imagine. So I'm just so excited to hear that. I mean, definitely, I know Robin as well, and you could have no better cheerleader in your corner. She is just pure fire and positivity, and it is so that's really exciting. And so for anybody out there, whether you're a teacher looking to transition or anybody else in an organization, I would say, two big takeaways really are, if you're looking to change something, one, you have to find that motivation, like where is that motivation coming from? And then getting that support, whether that's from your manager or from some course that you take or a mentor group that you join, having that motivation and then having that support structure is really huge to making any big change in your skill set or change in your life. When you made that change, whether it's from Idle Courses, you mentioned the technology, you mentioned kind of the confidence. Were there any other big skills that stand out to you, especially now as you look back at several years into your transition, that have been important for you to build that you didn't have when you were teaching formally?
Oh, that I didn't have. So one thing that and again, I don't know if it was just me, I talk about this with my mentor groups, but like sometimes I'm like, why didn't I know this before as a teacher? But I think it's because we're so siloed as teachers. But one thing that I've gained a lot, and I'm still learning, is a lot of approaching things out of curiosity. So like if I don't understand why something's happening, or I don't understand why a group at work is not implementing the assessment that I made the way that I instructed them to, or the way that it was intended to, what's going on? And so I immediately get like this like bucking up feeling. And I don't know if that came from my teaching or if it's just my personality, but I have learned to just like sit back and then approach that person with curiosity. And I never, not that I never knew that before, but not really. Like I just hadn't ever, I don't want to say that teachers are like dictators, but we do have control over our little environment.
100%.
And
Absolutely. That
so
makes
I
total
think
sense.
coming out of that, I had to learn how to collaborate better. We know how to
Yeah.
collaborate as teachers, but we aren't allowed to as much as we want to because we're stuck in our classroom with our kids and that's about it. And planning time gets taken away more and more and more as we get more and more duties added on as teachers.
Yeah.
And so I think that was one of the biggest things was like making sure that I kept an open mind to that curiosity mindset of like, I wonder why that's happening instead of assuming that I already know what's happening.
Yeah. I've, that really resonates with me, coming out of the military. And when I went into the corporate world from the military, it is dictatorial, in the military, much, much more so. And so it took me a long time to really understand, I would always be looking for like, who's in charge of like, who can make this decision and say go, and then it happens. And in the corporate world, very often, that's just not how it works. There is no person that says yes or no or go or don't go. It's all a collaboration. It's all building buy-in,
Have
working
you taken
together.
the Enneagram? Do you know what you are? Are you an 8?
I think I might be, actually. I
Because
have
that's
taken
very
it.
important to them is to know the hierarchy. That's
Yes.
very important to me too.
Yes, exactly. It just, I do think many, any bureaucratic system, which education certainly is, that has a strong element of that. There's the person who's in charge of the district, there's the person who's in charge of the school, and you can just kind of identify that. And at least in the organizations that I've worked at, it just doesn't exist.
Or even
And
if
so
it does, lines get crossed. And
yes.
I had a conversation about this just this morning with somebody on my team where I was just like, without sharing the details, it was that same conversation of, well, that I don't own that though. So how can I be helping them with this? I
Yes.
don't own that. We have ownership of things, but then there are these fuzzy lines of like, but we need you to cross over and show us this part. And it's like, I struggle with that a little bit of like, how
Yes.
can I own this and you own that, but yet I'm still supposed to help you with this piece of it, And it's not out of hesitancy to help. It's about that ownership and that like, who's the
Yes.
boss of this that I struggle with.
Yeah, it's such a big thing with kind of all support functions, but certainly learning and development. And I think, for any listeners who aren't in learning and development, who are out in the business and are struggling to work with learning and development, I think this is really important to understand as well, because out in the business, there is often still a lot of ownership. And there can be clearer lines. But whether it's L&D, broader HR, we cross over everything. We're not a part of the business units. We're somewhere else. We're having to collaborate across business units. Even something like you mentioned, the learning management system, even things like our tools very often aren't owned by us. They're owned by IT
Yep.
or software.
We're
And
training
so,
on those. Operations is part of it. You're right. HR is a huge part of it, even though we have
yep.
nothing like we do have
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
to do with it, but we're like my assessments may at some point drive hiring decisions or firing decisions. Although I have
Mm-hmm.
no say in that, but my
Yes.
assessments will. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're so right. It
Yeah.
goes
And so,
everywhere.
yeah, and so learning to as a learning professional, learning the ability to do that, of cross over those lines. And I think for me, this is a constant work in progress. That's such an important skill. And then for somebody out in the business trying to work with L&D, have a little empathy for us. It's tricky. It's tricky to cross all those lines all the time. So that, and I'm assuming that need has only grown as you have grown in your career. Now that you're a program manager, kind of how has your role changed from being that instructional designer to now being a program manager?
Yeah, so as the instructional designer before, it was more of a creative role. Not that I'm not creative now, but I was creating designs.
Yeah.
And now I'm more in the process management and the business side of it. I've had such a strong learning curve it fit me really well, and that's why they put me in this position, is because when I got hired on at Amazon, I immediately started pointing out, oh, I don't think, I think we can improve this, and this. And they were all
Yeah.
process type of things. Like, we can expedite this process. This isn't very efficient. Let's change this. And thankfully, and one thing I love about corporate that's very different than public education is they were like, oh, cool, show us and we'll try it. Right.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, no, that's not how we're doing it this year. We're doing it this way, which is very public education. Right.
Okay.
So I very much appreciated that. And I think it encouraged me to build that skill. And so as a program manager now, instead of creating courses, obviously, I'm the assessment program manager. I'm not even creating the assessments necessarily. I'm designing, how are we going to do this in a different way? And what's that going to do for showing a correlation between assessment scores and performance? Because otherwise, what is the point of assessments? And when I came on, to be honest, to be quite frank about my team, there was no point to the assessments. They were just there.
Yeah.
Right? They weren't proving anything. They were showing no correlation. They were just there to say that they had an assessment, I guess.
Check the box. Yeah.
Right. And so I've come in and now am working to show that correlation, because what that's going to do, obviously, is show the success of our coursework and be able to make, like we were talking about, HR decisions possibly. If we can show a direct correlation between an assessment and a performance, well, if somebody performs poorly on an assessment, we can say, do we want to continue with this person? Because correlation shows they're not going to do well afterwards. So why would we continue training them? Or we put A, B, and C in place and we can improve that, which will then show a correlation to good performance, right? Like, how can we remediate? Things like that. So it's just a different mindset. And I'm working cross teams a lot more, which is something really new. And something that teachers, I didn't get as a teacher. Again, like as an elementary school teacher, I just planned my curriculum and that was about it, and then you stick with your little second grade team. And I don't mean little like belittling that team, but like, if you have a team of 4 teachers, you're just sticking to that, right? You probably aren't even talking to the 4th, 5th, 6th grade teachers. Whereas I'm working worldwide with all these teams, and sometimes I'm like, I don't even know what you're doing, but I'm having to work with you on this because I know that you own this little piece of what I'm working on, right?
Yeah.
And which is super fun. It's super fun. I love that part of it. But that was brand new for me, for sure.
Yeah. Well, I gotta dive into this more, because I think I read a stat yesterday that was something like, said like 8% of CEOs see a performance impact or a business impact from their learning and development programs. Like it's just some vanishingly small number, which honestly doesn't surprise me that much. When you're talking, and so it's great that you're focusing on that as the goal. You mentioned it was a very different mindset as you shifted from being the instructional designer into your role now. What are some of the biggest, how would you describe that mindset shift to kind of push it to instructional designers to think about the outcome, be more outcome oriented, be more performance oriented? How do we make that shift? Because I feel like it's a really big part of the conversation, that at least on LinkedIn, that is the conversation of that lack of connection between the training and the outcome. From your experience, what do we need to do there to move that, to have that shift happen faster?
Well, I think we're going in the wrong order. I mean, especially as the assessment program manager now, I'm seeing the importance of assessments, and I see when they're written and when they're even talked about. And it's not until after the training's already built. Well, why are we not talking about, as soon as we see a problem, well, how are we going to know if we've changed this problem? That's assessment right there. How do we know if we've changed this problem? That should be the beginning. When instead it's, shoot, we have this problem. We have to build this training to educate them on this or change their behavior. And then it's like, oh, shoot, we have to have a quiz to like have them pass, right?
Yeah.
And that's how the order goes. And then we wonder why there's no correlation. Well, because were you even asking the right questions on the quiz? Did they correlate to learning objectives? Are the learning objectives even the right learning objectives? And so again, when I came on this team, those were the things I pointed out. I said, look, we're not even assessing all the learning objectives. I don't even know if these are the right learning objectives. Like, and I think those are problems that are all across. This was not just a my team issue at
Yeah.
Amazon.
Yeah. It's
This I
everywhere.
see this everywhere. I even see it in how sometimes we train our IDs. We start with, look at this cool, tool you get to use, instead of like, well, how do you even know that this course is going to change behavior? We have to start there. Write your assessment first and then work backwards from there. I don't think hardly anybody's doing that. And that's why there's no correlation. That's why there's only a 4% or 3%, whatever you stated that it was, is because they can't show it because they're not assessing correctly or at all.
Yeah, that's why I always love. I remember, I forget where I heard this, but most people in the learning profession are familiar with like the Kirkpatrick levels of analysis and I remember reading years ago, and it just changed my whole way of thinking about this. Of don't use Kirkpatrick as a like post-fact evaluation tool where there's these levels of evaluation. It should be a design tool that you just do in reverse. Yeah. You start with the performance outcome that you're trying to achieve and figure out how you're going to get that. Then you figure out, okay, what behaviors do you need in order to get that performance outcome? Then what learning do you need to get that behavior? Then what engagement style do you need in order to get that learning? Exactly. That backwards design is just, I think you're totally right. It's so huge. And from your position, because I often find that when I'm talking to subject matter experts and folks out in the business, one of the challenges that we're having to push against is this idea that when people think training, they think education, because that's where they came from. Everybody has had the experience of sitting in a classroom with a teacher talking to them. And so that's like their default. And so from your perspective, and we could kind of use this to close out maybe, since you've lived in both worlds, how do we help non-learning people, the stakeholders out in the business, make in many ways the same transition that you've made, not in the things they're doing, but in the way they think about training? How can we help people make that transition?
Well, I mean, I have an answer that goes with public education and just it's learning in general. Honestly, I think we're doing it all wrong. We're doing public education wrong. We're doing corporate learning wrong, because it's all about front loading. It's not about like this dynamic. Learning is supposed to be dynamic. I saw a post the other day on Instagram or something that said that kids inherently want to learn. They just want to. And they can teach themselves through play. That's what play is designed for. Same with adults. Yes. We play with things to figure them out, right? Sometimes we don't even read the directions. We just try, like we see, I can figure that out. It's not that hard. And we play with it until we can try to figure it out. Well,
and it's what you
sorry, go ahead.
At a basic level, I mean, it's what you see in animals too, right? It's like how do animals learn how to hunt, right? Like they play, they play with each other of play fighting, and then like the parent brings them like something that's dead, and they, like that's how you learn. That's how everybody learns.
In the academy, at Idle Courses Academy, it's how we teach people, like storyline, for instance. I always tell them, you got to go play in it first. Like, I'm not going to tell you, here's how to make a trigger. Here's how to add an image. Just go play. Just go figure it out. And instead, we've turned public education, corporate education into, we know what you need to know. So let me just front load you with a ton of stuff. We'll give you a quiz afterwards to see if you retained hours and hours and hours of information. Then we're going to immediately just put you to work to see if you can implement it. Instead of this, I mean, I think learning is supposed to be dynamic and playful. And so why couldn't public education be more about all these stations? And it's just like, go figure it out. See if you can make this balance, work using these different weights with numbers on them, which is then teaching math. Go see if you can figure out how to make blue with this paint. Like, I'm not going to tell you, or not make blue, but make purple, right? And then they go and play. And same with corporate education. My team, we train people who answer the phones for Amazon. Why not just have them try, like, not for the real customer, obviously, but why not just have them pick up a call and let's see what they already think is supposed to be said on the call and go from there. Yeah. What the trouble with that is that de-standardizes everything. And as Americans, we want everything to be standardized and the same. And that's the problem. I mean, it's even what I'm supposed to be doing with my assessments. I'm supposed to be standardizing them as much as possible, which isn't dynamic, is it?
Yeah, that's true. And, I think that is exactly where hopefully we're at the beginning of a revolution, because AI can truly enable that when used correct. Talk about having a conversation. Like the hardest part forever has been, well, how do you do that? How do you scale the ability to have those initial conversations and adjust where the conversations go? Well, hey, like we're basically there, or we're going to be there in the next couple of years. That's going to be easy to do.
That word scale is a big one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's totally spot on. I love that idea of really shifting to this idea of training as play and exploration, as such a hopeful way to think about the industry. You mentioned so you do coaching, and you have a podcast as well, right?
Yes, thank you for asking. So it's through the Idle Courses Academy. So Idle Courses Academy is where I transitioned, and where I mentor and coach anyone, not just teachers, but obviously I know more about how to help teachers transition. And through Idle Courses Academy, I have a podcast called Leaving the Classroom, where I just, it's a really short podcast, 5 to 10 minutes each episode. And I'm just giving tips and confidence builders, exactly what I know I was missing as a teacher to leave the classroom. And just, my goal is to help as many teachers safely and effectively transition out of the classroom into hopefully instructional design, because that's what I love and what I think is a great transition for them. But just to give them the courage to leave. They can leave. You can leave.
Awesome. Well, Christy, thank you so much for being here today. I think this has been a great conversation, and I'm sure we will have many more. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Matt. This is fun.
Thank you so much for tuning in today. If you liked the discussion, make sure to hit like and subscribe so you never miss an episode. As a reminder, if your team is struggling keeping up with the training development demands of your organization, we want to help. Better Everyday Studios is a full-service instructional design team that can help you with everything from ideation to actual content creation and delivery. Please reach out to us using the link in the episode notes below. Have a great day.